Shalom, friends. Welcome to this Shiur in Tanya, the Sefer Shel Benonim, Likutei Amarim by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. We're currently on chapter 30, and we're discussing the theme of Timtum HaLeiv, the dullness of the heart, and also the concept of humility in front of others. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to my channel and click on the bell button to be notified of future Shiurim. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet, my site, www.lovingkindness.co. So here we are now, we're learning about the concept, or we were learning about Timtum HaLeiv. Timtum HaLeiv is the concept of feeling a certain feeling of dullness within the heart, whereby we don't feel so inspired to serve God because we're lacking that feeling of light, that feeling of energy to serve God. And after we discussed the theme of Timtum HaLeiv, we kind of got to this idea of serving God by means of breaking ourselves down in the way that the Zohar gave the example, as we said in each introduction over here, of the log that doesn't want to catch light. And therefore what we do is we break up the log into splinters. And as a result of that, the splinters are able to catch a light from the fire. Now, we need to do that to ourselves also. And in chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe told us another way of dealing with this concept of shining out this godly spark within ourselves and letting it go free so that we can experience what it means to connect to God. And one way to do that is to be v'havel shafel ruach lifnei kol adam. A person must be humble in front of every person. And as we discussed before, this means that when we find ourselves in the presence even of somebody who is the lowest of the low, or at least what we consider to be the lowest of the low, we need to find that within them, that we don't really see them in that light when we look at ourselves and we realize, hold on a second, maybe we ourselves have something to do upon our own efforts. We need to work on ourselves, and let us stop looking at all the bad points of the other fellow who is of the lowest of the low, and let us concentrate on ourselves. Are we really serving God as we should be? Do we really put in all the kavanah, the intention that we need to when we serve God and we're davening? Do we really concentrate on our prayers? When we give charity, I mean, if we consider ourselves to be great people, do we put that effort in prayer? Yes. Do we give charity as we should? Maybe not so much. Well, same thing with the prayer. Are we putting enough effort in? Maybe not so much. Meaning, when we begin to compare ourselves to that person that we look at and we say, well, he is really a lowly individual, that is what we need to do to start working on the attributes of Heve Shafel Ruach Lifnei Kol Adam. We have to be of humble spirit in the presence of every person. And we do that. We break ourselves down. We crush ourselves. We come to realize who we are by realizing that if we really do feel that we're great people, we need to begin to behave as great people. Many people look at themselves and they say, oh, I'm so much greater than that individual. Look at me. Well, when one takes an honest look at oneself, one needs to say to oneself, has one really reached that level? Is one really behaving correctly? If so, well and good. But that is not the person who's stuck in the situation that he's not yet connecting with Hashem on the highest level. The person who is striving for that level, he wants to connect with Hashem, needs to break himself down so that the godly light shines out, and then he won't experience that feeling any longer of the Timtum HaLeiv. He'll begin to feel energized when he serves God. And here we are now at the end of chapter 30. I'm just going back one line just to get back into it. Aval be'emes, but in truth, imhu yodea sefer. So if this individual is a scholar, a scholarly type person, he's a scholar, yodea sefer, he knows to read, he can read the books. You see, here we are, we're reading the Hebrew text and we're translating it. We seem to get some sort of understanding of it. If a person feels that he's on that level already, and he holds on to the Torah of God, the kirvas elokim yachpots, and he desires the closeness of God. Is that you? Is that the individual who you consider yourself to be? And you know, when you look at other people, you say he's a low life. But me, I'm okay because I know how to study Torah and I know how to cleave to the Torah and to get close to Hashem. That's all I want in my life. I'm such a great individual, he says to himself. Then the Alter Rebbe says, Gadol avono min so. Then his sin is too great to bear. V'ashamaso gadla bekiflei kiflaim, and his guilt is of the standard which is great, doubled and redoubled over. B'meshe eino nilcham, in the fact that he does not fight the war. Umiskaber al yitzru, and he strengthens himself over his inclination. Be'erech u'bechinas milchama atzuma hanal, in the aspect and the value of the aspect of this awesome, powerful war. Me'ashmas kal shebekalim, than the guilt of the least, the low of the lowly, the lowest of the low. From those people who sit on the corners, who are far from Hashem and His Torah. See, when we look at the person who seems to be sitting on the corner, he looks like a lowlife. Look how he's dressed. We say, Nebach, the fellow is begging. He has absolutely nothing. He looks like he looks like, where does he come from? Why doesn't he become a little bit more sophisticated in his life? Look what has become of him. And we think to ourselves, what a low life. But me, I'm okay. The Alter Rebbe says, on the contrary, if one is going to judge somebody else and think of them as a low life, one must realize, as we said before in this chapter, that the test that this person is undergoing, that has brought him to his situation, is so great that we cannot imagine what it is that he has gone through to bring him to this particular point. He looks like a rough fellow. He looks like a lowly individual. But who knows the fire? Who knows the test that he's going through in his heart that brings him to this level? But who can we speak about only in this world? Only ourselves. We can only work on ourselves. Everybody has the answer for everybody else. This is an amazing concept in life. Whenever we bump into other people, we know all the answers of their lives. It's an incredible thing. A person comes along, he meets somebody, the person says to him, I have X difficulty. Oh, I can solve X difficulty for you. You are this and this type of person, and that is why this is happening to you. Meanwhile, I'm okay. That is what the person says to himself. And it's funny that every single person that one bumps into, one can find that type of aspect of being able to correct everything about them. We can find everything wrong with them. We can tell them why their life is a mess, why they've ruined their lives. We can tell them all sorts of things. And then one day we're sitting alone in our bedroom, we're crying, and we realize perhaps we're not so hot shot after all. Perhaps there's what to work on in ourselves. That's where the real test comes. That is what the Alter Rebbe is telling us right now. He's saying, hold on a second. You don't know the tough test that this person is going through that's brought him to be on the particular level that he is, that you call him a low life, that he's the lowest of the low. But when it comes to you yourself, says the Alter Rebbe, me, myself, what is it that I need to do? I must say to myself, if I really consider myself to be a Torah scholar, I really consider myself as cleaving to God, as wanting only to desire godliness and spirituality, then I should know something about myself. I'm not such a hot shot after all. Am I really serving God as I should? Never mind how he is serving God. His test could be far greater than mine. But am I serving God as I should? Do I daven with the correct intention as I should? Do I indeed give enough charity as I'm required to do relative to my station in life? And it turns out, says the Alter Rebbe, that their guilt is not so great after all, because they're the lowest of the low. It's natural that they're going to commit the particular aveira that they're involved in. But me, I should not be committing that aveira because I regard myself as that Torah scholar, or I regard myself as that person who's cleaving to God. I need to look at myself, not at him. That's the mistake that we make. And the reason that they have this difficulty is that the point is that they are not able to conquer their evil inclination, that burns like a fiery flame, because of the fear of Hashem, which means that they lack this fear of Hashem to bring them ultimately to conquer this inclination. Hamevinu mabit, who is understanding and who looks el kol ma'asehim, on all of their deeds. Ka'ashamas kol hakarev hakarev el Hashem, like the guilt of whoever is closer to Hashem, ve'el toraso, and to his Torah, ve'avodaso, and to his service. The Alter Rebbe is telling us a very big concept in Torah here, and that is, the greater the man is, the more he is going to have to work on himself. Not the other way around. We look at the low-life person and we say to ourselves, oh, what a low-life. He should surely be working on himself to get himself right. But the reality is, because he is on that level, his effort of avodah is a different concept of the effort of avodah that we ourselves need to involve ourselves in, which means to say, the greater I am, the more I have to work on myself. See, the wealthier I am, the more charity I have to give. The stronger I am, physically speaking, the more I would have to help people in the physical sense. I mean, think about it. Let's assume that I was a 7-foot tall man, and I walk into a store one day, and I notice that there is an elderly lady, and she's 5 foot, or she's 4'7", and she's trying to get something off a shelf. And I walk past her, and indeed, the item on the shelf is at the 6 foot 5-inch, 6 foot 8-inch level. Of course, I can simply reach across, pick the item off the shelf, and give it to this lady. In fact, I can give it to whoever I want to. It doesn't have to be any old lady. I'm just using it as an example. Meaning, if God gives me particular strengths, what he's testing me on is whether or not I use those strengths that I have been given to the fullest capabilities of what I can do. If God has given me the ability to study Torah, I need to measure my litmus test, my barometer has to be on the concept of how am I serving God relative to the greatness and the great strengths that God has given to me. Yes, it is easy to judge the fallow. It is easy to judge the low life. But that's not going to help me to get really close to Hashem. That's not going to help to break me down and realize that I'm not as great and super as I really think that I am. Instead, I need to break myself down further. When I break myself down further, the light of God is able to attract itself into me. And as a result, through this magnetic force, as the force of light generates within me and enters into me, I can finally cleave to Hashem. That only comes about because I broke myself down. How did I break myself down? I was shafel ruach lifnei kol adam. I am humble in front of every other person. I can see that relative to other people, I'm actually quite limited. Not limited next to them. Oh, I'm far greater than they are. I've studied much more than they have. But nevertheless, relative to who they are in their tests and who I am and my tests, you know something? Perhaps I'm not serving God as I should be doing. As our rabbis have said to us, the story of Acher, everybody knows the famous story of this man in the Gemara who was called Acher, the other one. Really, it was Elisha ben Abuya. His name was Elisha ben Abuya. And Elisha ben Abuya was one of the 4 rabbis that entered into the deepest secrets of Torah, into the Pardes. We know that there were 4 rabbis that entered into the deepest secrets of Torah. Rabbi Akiva was one of them. We know that he entered in peace. He came out in peace. There was Rabbi Shimon ben Azai and Rabbi Shimon ben Zoyma. Ben Zoyma and ben Azai. We know that Ben Zoyma, after his whole mystical experience, he managed to come back into the world, but he went a bit crazy. Ben Azai, on the other hand, the moment that he went into the spiritual worlds and he saw the beauty there, and he realized that was incomparable to what this world is. What does he have to come down to this world for again? And so he packed up his bags in his spiritual state and he left life and he went into the spiritual worlds. But Acher, who was an outstanding man, let us not forget, he was none other than the teacher of Rabbi Meir. Meir Baal Hanes, Rabbi Meir the Sofer, the greatest man at that point in time, perhaps the greatest man in his generation. Rabbi Meir was the student of Elisha ben Abuya, Acher. And yet what happened to this great man, Acher, after his mystical experience? He came back into this world and he basically converted. He took himself away from Torah and mitzvahs and God, and he said, I want no part of it. And God said, hold on a second. This is dreadful. You are the greatest in the generation. You are one of the greatest men in the generation. It is not befitting you to end up in a situation that you hand in and you pack up everything and you say, I'm not interested in serving God any longer. And that is why he was held to be so liable, because God said, you of all people need to know how much greater, what more there is to do, how much greater God is, how much spirituality is in the world, the mysteries of creation. And instead, you turned it all around and you made up a story in your mind to say that there's no God, or perhaps there are two gods, or perhaps God is the angel, or perhaps whatever it was that Acher saw and experienced, whatever the story is, whichever opinion we go according to. The problem is Acher should never have collapsed as he did, and therefore he was held liable. The greater the person, the more responsible he is, the more humble he must be, not only in terms of himself, but towards other people. Because Hashem says, Acher, this great man who came and he converted, he took himself away from God, he knew my honor when he experienced his visions of the Ruach HaKodesh, the divine inspiration that he went through, the entering of the Pardes into the deeper secrets of Torah. He knew God intimately. And after knowing God intimately as a human being is capable of doing, he came back into the physical world and he simply said, I'm handing it all in. And God said, you of all people cannot behave in that way. It is the greater the person that the more he needs to work on himself. It is the lesser the person, the more we can be forgiving that he didn't work on himself because already he doesn't know what to do. Therefore, our rabbi said, Al Amei Haaretz, about all the ignorant people, the people of the land, the ignorant people who didn't study Torah properly, that their intentional sins that they do, they become for them like mistaken sins, which means God kind of overlooks it. How does God work exactly in terms of his judgments? That is something that we cannot understand fully. But the point of the matter is that when a person who doesn't know what Torah is all about and he commits an Aveira or she commits an Aveira, God is more lenient, says the Torah, upon this person because altogether they don't know what they're doing. But the person who does know what they're doing and they behave in a way that is contrary to God's will is more liable. So too, the same thing takes place in the physical world. If we take, for example, a person who gets to a prominent position in society, he becomes a great doctor, he becomes a great lawyer, he becomes a great accountant. I'm just giving these as examples on the side. And then afterwards, for example, imagine a great judge. He's the judge of the Supreme Court. And he's very successful, by the way. Years go by, he's in charge of the court. And then it turns out that 10, 15 years later, 20 years after being judge for this particular court, the Supreme Court, he is caught having murdered somebody in cold blood. He is caught having dealt in drugs. I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it all out. He made sure that the drugs got onto the airplane. He bribed a few people, even told them he's a judge, they won't get into trouble. And he was caught out. Imagine what society say about such an individual. Yes, it is one thing to be caught out when you're just one of the crowd, but to be caught out in this manner and you're the judge of the Supreme Court, how dare you behave in such a manner? The greater the person is, the more he is responsible for behaving as a greater person. The greater a person is in his connection to Hashem, in the knowledge of God, the more that he desires to cleave to God, the more effort is required of him to serve God. Do not think that the closer one gets to God, the easier it becomes to serve God. On the contrary, the closer that one gets to God, the more one's responsibility becomes. And as a result of that, he is held responsible for the actions to a greater degree than the lowest of the low. And that is how the Alter Rebbe is concluding this whole chapter. He wanted to start from the beginning by explaining to us we need to humble ourselves, because the only way that the godly spark can cleave to us and shine out, to totally overwhelm the animal spirit, to allow this godliness to express itself, that we should feel energized, we should feel energetic to serve God. How do we get that spark, especially when we feel that Timtum HaLeiv, when it's not there? We need to humble ourselves in front of people. The Alter Rebbe says, don't humble yourself in terms of yourself. That's easy stuff. That's easy going. You know, I know the whole of Shas Baal Peh, the person says. Oh, fantastic. But then he says, shh, I don't tell anybody. It's a secret. Nobody should know. I'm a very humble person. Nobody should know that I know all these things. That's easy. But you know what's difficult? When one stands in the presence of a lowlife. And in front of the lowlife, one says, perhaps I'm really not as great as this individual. That is the ultimate of humility. How do I get to such a level? That is what the Alter Rebbe said to us. Ultimately, it is about looking at myself in terms of who I am and the talents that I have and the greatness of who I really am. And then saying to myself, with all of that, am I really serving Hashem to the degree that he serves Hashem relative to his station in life? Perhaps not. And if not, I need to humble myself. Perhaps indeed his test to the whole concept of his life, the physicality, the materiality, this material grossness that he lives in, because of the fire of the temptations that he goes through. We don't understand that particular test. I'm only a Torah scholar. I sit in Kollel all day long. Not me personally. I'm just making a statement. Sitting in Kollel all day long and I'm reading all these beautiful words and life is clean. So I say to myself, what a clean individual I am. What a great individual I am. But perhaps if I were to find myself in his situation, perhaps I would serve God no better than he is doing. Therefore, all I need to do is look at myself and say, but am I serving God as I am required? Do I have enough intention in my prayers as befitting a person of my station in life? Am I giving tzedakah to people who need it in accordance with my station in life? If so, I'm serving God correctly. If not, there is much to work on. And that is where we conclude chapter number 30, and we move on to chapter 31. Chapter 31 in the Tanya takes us one step further. At this point in time, as a person begins to crush himself, as he begins to break himself down, he is liable to fall into another problem. And this problem is called depression. Oh, the Alter Rebbe has told me I need to crush myself. I need to break myself down. So I sit in my room and I begin to fall apart. And I say, you know, really, I'm considered nothing next to the lowest of the low. Perhaps he is far greater than I am. Oi, what has become of me? Where will I end up? I've really turned into nothing. And at this point in time, a person is liable to become depressed. Now, depression is a bad midah. It is a bad attribute. And therefore, we need to understand how to work with the attributes of depression, of this terrible sadness that can destroy us, and know how to function with it correctly so we use it to serve Hashem and not to break us down. The breaking down that we've gone through throughout the Tanya in the last few chapters is not a breaking down that is required to destroy us, God forbid. No part of working on oneself, whether it is done through Chassidut, whether it is done through Musar, whether it is done through any part of Torah, needs to break us down in a way that destroys us. God forbid that at any point in time, we need to be sitting on our beds crying because we think that we have lost all hope in our progress, in cleaving to Hashem, in comparing ourselves next to other people, whatever it is. That is not the Torah approach. The Torah approach, at least the Hasidic approach, and I don't believe that Musar is any different if one studies the Musar correctly, is an approach that makes us solidly aware of where we are at so that we will improve ourselves and become even better. Again, the person who goes to gym, as we use it as an example, because people can relate to physical matters, if he goes to gym and he weighs himself in and he says to himself, my goal is to reach the 180 let's say the 200-pound mark. That's what he wants to get to. He wants to reach approximately, let's call it 80 kilograms of weight, whatever it is. He really wants to put on some weight onto his body. I mean, in the positive sense. I don't mean in the sense of fat. I mean, he's working on himself and building his body up. And he walks into gym one day and he sees he's only on the 72 kilogram mark. He's only sitting at whatever it is, 180 pounds, and he's trying to get to 200 pounds. When he stands on the scale, it is no good if he stands there and he bursts out crying. What he needs to do is to stand on the scale and he says to himself, well, I see I have not yet reached my goal. I need to work on myself a little further. I have to put on a bit more weight. I need to be a bit more bulkier so that I can be even stronger, produce these stronger looking muscles, build up my body a little bit more. The purpose of the exercise of the weighing in is not in order to depress him and make him feel like he is nothing. The purpose of the weighing in is to prove to him that there's still what to do, and it should give him the motivation and the strength to go ahead and to work out even harder. The point of the breaking down in the spiritual sense is not to destroy us, God forbid. It is not to just turn us into a state of depression where we need to go and see the psychiatrist. All the psychologists, depending on what degree we're sitting here, what the problem is, depending on what's going on, I'm not commenting on either of them. I'm simply saying that it should never lead to a stage whereby we need to seek professional help because we can't get ourselves out of it. On the contrary, when we break ourselves down, it is there for the purpose of building ourselves up. The depression that we experience is a breakdown depression, not a destruction depression. Vehine, and so he begins. Behold, even though it is, when a person begins to lengthen out in great depth and to go into depth, he begins to expand upon these ideas in all of these matters that we spoke about above. For an hour or two, the Alter Rebbe is not holding back here in any way. When we begin to work on ourselves, it is not a 2-minute exercise. It is not a quickie. I guess when I'm doing Shema Koleinu, I'll do a quick 20 seconds of how I'm doing. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that a person is serious. He's one of the masters of accounting, as we discussed before in the Tanya. We're talking about a person who perhaps before he goes to sleep at night, perhaps when he wakes up in the morning, he spends half an hour on his bed or in the study room or in the wherever he is. He sits down quietly by himself and he begins to contemplate a little bit about himself. An hour, 2 hours. He starts to think of where he's really at. Most people never do this in their lives even once. If they do it once, you're lucky. They do it twice, wow, that's exceptional. 3 times, wow, this individual, he must be crazy. He's a lunatic. He spends time thinking about his purpose in life. Why does he just get on and live? What's he doing? Wasting his life, thinking about the purpose of life. Just get on and make money and be happy and get your next yacht and private airplane. Now this person is beginning to contemplate life, beginning to contemplate himself, and he considers the lowliness of his spirit, and he begins to have this broken heart. And as a result of this, it starts to hit home, and he becomes filled with great sadness. Sadness here is in the sense of a negative sadness, a depression. Now the person's really wiped out. He says, well, what good am I in any case? I mean, the Alter Rebbe said I should look at myself and say, if I'm a fine person and the lowest of the low, he's okay, and I'm supposed to be a fine person, and really I must compare myself to him and say, really, I'm nothing in comparison to him. Well, maybe I'm nothing after all. So then he starts to say, he gets into a state of depression. It sets in. Lo yachush. The Alter Rebbe says, don't worry. Don't let it worry you for a second. Don't fear about it. Va'af, and even though she'atzvus himitzad klipas nega, even though it is that this depression comes from the side of the klipa, of the husk, of the shell, of the peel, it's the outside world where the evil forces are. The depression is on the side of the outside forces, of the klipas nega, from the klipas nega, which is that translucent, bright, glowing part of the klippa. It is the highest part of the klippa. It is the klippa which is a parav klippa. It joins up the good to the bad. And so therefore this idea of atzvus is sitting in the realm of both good and bad. You can turn it to good, you can turn it to bad as you want to. V'lo mitzad HaKedusha. Now you should know that the depression, this terrible sadness that begins to set in, is certainly not from the side of holiness. Ki b'tzad HaKedusha, because from the side of holiness, kesiv, it is written, oz v'chedva bimkoimo. When it comes to holiness, we say that strength and joy is in its place. If a person wants to know what holiness is, here's the answer. When a person gets filled with a general sense of well-being, happiness, and strength and confidence, he's on the side of holiness, at least on the positive side, of course. I'm not talking about a happy-go-lucky person who just squanders his life away. He's happy-go-lucky. I'm talking in the general sense of the word of a person who is cleaving towards holy matters. How do we know when he's on the right path? We know he's on the right path when he's filled with simcha. When you meet him and you see naturally there's a certain general feeling of happiness about him, satisfaction. He feels content. Even with all the trials in life, even with all the tests and the challenges going on, he seems to be okay. When he's dealing with that type of attribute, the simcha, he's on the side of holiness. Therefore, what? The atzvut, The depression is the side of, could be unholiness, but it's not true. It is in fact in the middle. It is at the point of the klipa noga. The ein hashchina shora ella mitoch simcha, and you should know that the divine presence only rests on something which is filled with happiness. A person wants to know. Rule number 1. Oh God, he says, bless me with divine inspiration. I wish to become like a mini prophet, so to speak. I wish to engage in the mysteries of Torah and feel your divine presence with me, he says to God. What is the first requirement that this individual needs? He needs to be a person who is happy, because the Ruach HaKodesh, this divine inspiration, prophecy, all these matters of cleaving to God, these things only come about to a person who is filled with a sense of happiness. He knows his purpose in the world. He is content with what God is giving him. He understands what is happening with him. Even if he doesn't understand it, he accepts it. He's willing to think about it and consider it. He sees God in his life. He's not angry at everything all the time. Only such an individual will be able to experience divine prophecy, divine inspiration, because holiness only rests on something that is happy. V'chein l'dvar halacha. And also when we speak about learning halacha, the same idea applies. When a person wants to experience and he needs to learn halacha, etc., all of these things require happiness in order to succeed. Ella, however, rather, she'ima atzvus hi mimilei dishmaya. If it turns out that this depression that comes about is through matters that pertain to heaven, then hi mibechinas tov shebenoiga. It comes about through the good of the noiga, of this glow. So we've got this klippa, we've got this external shell, and this external shell has a glow to it. And the glow is saying, if you enter into it, you get sucked up into negativity. If you absorb the external ray, you get fused or infused with the holiness. Which side are we going to choose? Well, if the sadness comes about through things that are related to godly matters, there's more I need to do. I've got to improve myself. There's more study that needs to be done. I even know that I have to give more tzedakah. All these things relate to spiritual aspects. Then one is working with the aspect of the good of the noiga. And therefore the Arizal wrote, Shafilu dagas avoinas, even worry over one's sins. When a person begins to worry and he says to himself, but I committed this particular aveira. I'm such a terrible person. Oh, I did this thing wrong. I am a terrible person. Look at me. Look what a rubbish I am. Eina reuya. It is not fitting. Ki im b'shas havidoi. Except only at a time of doing confession. You know, we do it for those who daven the Nusach Sfard, the Nusach Ari. Every single day comes Shachris, comes Mincha. We say Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu. We begin to hit our hearts. Of course, it doesn't appear in the Ashkenazi text, but in the Sepharad text, and I'm not saying Sephardi, I'm saying Nusach Sfard, Nusach Ari, the Nusach of Chabad. So, of course, we do the confession at least twice a day. And then, in fact, when we go to sleep at night, then according to the Nusach of these versions, we also do the Ashamnu Bagadnu. And according to some people even, one should do the entire Al-Chait that we do on Yom Kippur, Al-Chait this, Al-Chait that, on this sin, on that sin. And we begin to engage in this confession. The Arizal says to us, now that is the time to engage in the moment of sadness about where one is at. Meaning what? There is a time and place for everything. Just as there's a time and place for physical things, there is a time and place for spiritual things. When it comes to matters of depression, please, the Arizal is telling us for sure. The Alter Rebbe is quoting the Arizal, and of course this goes back to many other deeper sources. The concept is as follows. If I feel the need to be depressed about something, wait for the moment of the vidoi. And when I'm doing vidoi, of course, the Yetzer Hara plays with us. It wants us to feel depressed when we should be feeling happy. And when we get to the vidoi, all we want to do is to leave shul already. We've had enough. But everything has its time and place. And therefore, when we are engaged in the vidoi while we're davening and we say, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, etc., I'm guilty, and whatever all the things are that we've done, We need to start thinking about those things that we've done, and we should really regret it. That is the time and the place to do those things. And it doesn't even occur at the time of prayer and the study of Torah. Meaning, now we're studying Torah. Oh, what does the Yetzer Hara do? The Yetzer Hara says, you're studying Torah, but yesterday, don't you remember what you did? What a terrible thing you did. And now you think you're so holy. You can study Torah. Shame on you. And then next thing you know, the person is distracted and they don't study any Torah whatsoever. The Ari points out to us that when it comes to feeling sad, sadness is expressed at the time of vidui. Sadness, depression is not expressed at a time of prayer when we should be joyous. Please Hashem, help us with these things. I feel so close to you. And Talmud Torah, when we study Torah, this is not the time to get engaged in depressing matters. These things need to be done with happiness. From the side of holiness specifically. This is the concept. The concept is simple. Depression has its time and place. It is in the realm of the Klippa Noga. We need to use it only at the time of holy matters. We need to engage it in matters of holiness, not in matters of unholiness. Afal Pikain, nevertheless, so it be. Harekach hi hamida. This is the attribute. Likafia lesitra akra b'mina v'dugmata. You know what we're going to be doing now? We are going to be subjugating the other side, the side of negativity, the side of evil, with its very own power, with its very own self. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take the force of depression, which is a negative force, and we're going to use the side of evil itself to conquer the evil itself. As our rabbis have said, which means from its own self, from the forest, comes the very handle of the axe that chops it down. You see, when a person is chopping down the forest, he chops it down with an axe, using the handle which was made from the forest that he had cut down the handle from originally. We use the very tool of destruction of the Yetzer Hara to break down the Yetzer Hara. In our next lesson, we're going to learn more about it. We're going to use the Yetzer Hara's tool of sadness and depression to break and conquer the Yetzer Hara itself. Please join me for the next shiur, where we'll see this in more detail. Thank you very much for joining me for this shiur. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet, my site, www.lovingkindness.co. Please like this shiur if you have enjoyed it. Please show your appreciation. Click on the like button. Please offer a comment. I'd be happy to reply, or contact me via my website, and I'd be happy to discuss any matters of Torah, life, and growth with you. Let's learn more about the things that we're learning now. If you'd like to learn another shiur, be in touch with me. We can learn privately, or perhaps we can even set up another shiur together like we're doing over here in this shiur. Please share this video with family and friends, subscribe to my channel, and click on the bell button to be notified of future shiurim. I look forward to seeing you in another shiur in the near future. As always, I wish you everything of the best. Keep well. Take care. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.